Given that you've worked so intimately for the last few months, what do you think you would say about you and your work?
Oh man, that's a tough question.
Because I have the real answer to that.
Do you?
He sent me a voice note at 5 a.m. this morning.
You're joking.
Hello, David. Stephen here. Thought I'd send you a voice note just to let you know what I think of Will.
Will Lindsay-Perez, welcome to the Development by David podcast in Glasgow. How are you, mate?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
I want to know off the bat, what has today looked like for you?
Today's been a pretty easy day, to be honest. Up at 7, worked until about 9, and then on the train up to Edinburgh, just editing. Today's one of those weird days where I'm not in the office. I'm not with Steve working, so it's been quite nice to kind of just get my head down in some work and enjoy coming back up to Edinburgh. It's a special place for me, so yeah.
I was hoping that it would sound like you travelled up just to see me, but that wasn't the case.
Shit. Up at 7 hours of research, and bang, I'm here. Private jet.
Paid for by me, obviously.
Yeah, the David performance jet is crazy.
What's it like to be behind the other side of the camera or in front of the camera? Because I'm sure you're used to being at the other side of some of these cameras. It's
strange. I'm trying not to look too far that way. I've got that feeling in my stomach a little bit, but I sympathize with people. Like, I know when I point cameras at people, I'm not really thinking about how they're feeling. But it's a refreshing feeling. This is one of the reasons I'm here, is to try and get used to that, like that discomfort. So yeah.
Your Instagram bio is dropping out of uni to tell stories that last a lifetime. And today you're on the podcast to tell your story. Is this a new chapter for you where you want to kind of share or document your journey in light of you sharing that for someone else?
Interesting. I wouldn't say it's like a new chapter of like me trying to branch out into my personal brand. In all honesty, I spend a lot of my time watching Stephen on stage because I film a lot of his talks. And I was like, man, public speaking is such a skill. It's such an art form, and it's something that you need to keep on top of. And I used to do a few bits last year, but for me, this was really just like, okay, I haven't had that feeling in my stomach for a while. So this was the perfect opportunity.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think, given that you're surrounded by Stephen Bartlett and his podcast, which is a storytelling podcast, why do you think stories are so powerful?
I think stories they're the only thing really that humans can connect with. I'll tell a story. I created a documentary called Stanley Booker, From a Statistic to a Story. And it was all about a First World War soldier who passed away in one of the schools I used to go to. And for me, the key with this was, it was a journey for me to understand remembrance and the First World War like I never had before. And what I eventually learned through this was that the only way you can really understand huge numbers of casualties, deaths, statistics about war is to bring it down to one person and one story. And I think that was really for me when I started to realize that you can't empathize with millions and millions of followers. You can't empathize with millions of pounds, but you can empathize with a story.
I love that. I think Joseph Stalin did say, and I don't get into the habit of quoting this guy, but he did say, one death, a tragedy, a million a statistic. And I think your documentary really brings that to life. And I guess storytelling for me, it's very difficult at first, having to do the kind of self-awareness journey, do the self-development journey to understand what are the unique facets of your transformation that make you you. And I think you being here, I know you said you've done a little bit of this last year, but you being here is like getting a rep in. I really think storytelling is like training biceps. At first, it's really quite sore.
You've done a fair bit of that.
Performance enhancement, no, I'm joking. but really, like at first it's really sore. You're kind of tapping into some grave trauma perhaps, but it builds back a little bit stronger, and you just do one more rep at a time, one more set at a time, one more work at a time. And over the course of the year, you go from having one anecdote or one little episode to having a whole story. And I think by very nature of doing time under tension, you build this beautiful lifespan of a story. So hopefully this is one extra rep in your journey to continually building your story.
Yeah, I love the way you phrased that. Yeah.
So let's take it back to the beginning. Where were you born? What was your upbringing like? What was educationally for you?
So I'm Bristol boy. So I was born in Bristol in St Michael's Hospital, and I had a really privileged to say that I've had a really fantastic upbringing. Went to a secondary school called Red and Green. I've been lucky to have a really good group of friends around me at school. I've enjoyed academia, but it was really in kind of secondary school where I kind of found my love for like photography and cameras and things like that. I then went to sixth form at a place called Bristol Grammar School, and then went to university after that to Edinburgh. So that's like a very brief top line.
When did you first get your hands on some camera gear?
It was my dad's. I did a long-term borrow, which he wasn't a fan of. I think I was about year 10, and I just became obsessed with like the buttons. I can't explain it, but like wanting to understand what everything does, diving into menus, trying to understand functions and things like that. And at this time, it was really like taking photos of like cupboards in my bedroom, like for hours, just trying to understand the buttons. And eventually my dad's camera went missing from his room, and I just started taking photographs of anything. Gardens, like sports events, whatever I could. And that was around, secondary school, around year 10.
When did you make the transition from stills to scenes, or from stills to videoing things?
Yes, there's probably a bit of context there needed. I started really like understanding the functions. And then I had a teacher in secondary school called Mr. Williams, he took my phone off me one day in class. And at the end of the class, I went back to him. I was agitated. I was like, God, I need to get this back. And before he get it back to me, I was expecting the usual lecture, the classic, why are you on your phone, things like that. And he said to me, who took the photo on your lock screen? And it was this photograph, quite blurry, very grainy, but it was this black and white shot of an ape that I'd just taken in the zoo. And I said, it was me. And he was like, I had no idea what he was going to do. He was like, okay, I want you to take some more. I want you to take some photos of this, this, and this, and come back to me and show me. And I was kind of stood there. I was like, what about the detention? What about the letter home? All these kind of things. And Mr. Williams did that with me for the first time. And every week I would go back and I'd present him images. And it could be anything. It could be photos of, like I said, apes at the zoo. It could be photos of plants. It could be photos of like leaves that I just found on the floor. But every single time he gave me an incentive to come back and give me feedback. And it wasn't feedback in terms of tearing the images apart. It was probably just a bit of fire, being like, hey, that's nice. Well done. Go again. So that developed into me taking portraits of my friends. I really enjoyed working with people, taking photographs of people in outdoor spaces and their working environments. And that then led to me starting my website, Lindsay-Perez Photography at the time. This was in year 10 still. And I basically this is when the like faking it till I made it started. This is what I would say. Like I started shooting weddings in secondary school after shooting portraits of my friends. And I'm like, how did people let me do that?
You couldn't even get served at the bar whilst you're on job.
I didn't even have ID. And people are being like, yeah, of course you can shoot my wedding for me. That's no problem. So yeah, did still life, kind of random things, portraits with friends, and then started properly with kind of weddings and corporate photography and things like that.
I find that relationship with your teacher very important. You could have been punished for having your phone out in school, which would have given a poor feedback loop of using your phone. And then you would have had a poor relationship with that teacher, and you wouldn't go to him with any of this creative work that you had. But because it was investigative of a little facet that made you, and then gave you homework to pursue that extracurricular thing on a weekly basis, and then validated that capability, that instilled confidence in you. That famous Alex Hormozy quote that's circulating the internet, confidence isn't screaming affirmations in the mirror, it's having an undeniable stack of proof that you are who you say you are. That was a part of the process of building that stack of proof. Having someone over your shoulder who's older than you that you probably respect and are a little bit afraid of, validating a competency that no one else in the class had. Do you think that was like really empowering for you to understand that you had specific knowledge in that classroom that other people didn't have, and that was your new kind of niche or unique selling point?
Yeah, 100%. I think it becomes a bit of a superpower, doesn't it, when you're doing something that goes against the grain. I see a lot in schools, and I felt this myself, that the creative industries they're sort of left on the back burner. And it's really difficult for a lot of students to feel like they say that they found their passion, or that they feel like they are a creative. And really that's just because there's a lack of evidence. So this belief that when I was 16 that I could shoot a wedding, or that I could take photographs of my friends, didn't come from this deep inside passion that was genetic. It probably came from the evidence. the evidence that I'd been doing it week on week, and perhaps the confidence that Mr. Williams gave me early on.
Why does every photographer start in wedding shoots?
Oh man, I don't know, but I'll tell you what does happen. You start in weddings and you get the hell out of there as fast as you can. Like, I don't think I could go back there. No way. But I think it's almost like the natural progression, isn't it? Because you just think that's where the money is.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So you transitioned to university. What did you study and where?
So after sixth form, that's where I kind of made the jump to film and videography. I think I got to a point with photography where I'd kind of felt like I'd hit a bit of a rut and I wanted to know what was next. So I went to Edinburgh University to study film and television, and that was just after the pandemic, when we were kind of coming out of lockdown.
How did you find readjusting to Edinburgh life and university life as a whole?
I loved it, man. I was really lucky to have a really good group of people around me, and to have parents who support me going into university to do something like film. And Edinburgh's so good. Like, I came back today and I'm like, oh man, I love this place. It's incredible.
And just to preface for the listeners, we're in Glasgow. I would never venture through to Edinburgh or go and visit a studio through there. I wouldn't ditch Paul like that either.
David's private jet picked me up from Edinburgh and we flew straight in. So it was an average service. I'll give you that.
I would hate to see what the interior of that. It looked like an EasyJet flight.
Let's hope it doesn't look like that sofa. Come on.
Well, I mean, EasyJet just went after the band Easy Life for having a similarity in their name. I'm not sure if you've heard of that indie band, so they had to rebrand their name. So I'm sure if I use development by David Colours on the flight, I would quickly have no plane in the sky. So
you'd hope they have bigger fish to fry, like than the band. Like, I
don't think they do.
Christ, oh yeah.
Oh, so at the age of 21, I believe you dropped out of university.
Yes, yeah. So
and was that to fulfill Lindsay-Perez Productions full time, or was that to venture into your new role full time?
Yeah, I'll take it back a bit. I'll give some context. So my film and television degree was at Edinburgh. And the first 3 years of that really for me it was really good. It was really, really strong. And I've enjoyed my studies. I had my own business that I was running alongside it, which was called Lindsay-Perez Productions. So that's really developed from year 10 when I was doing photography to starting to do freelance work through sixth form up until university. So alongside my studies at uni, I was also doing my freelance work, trying to understand how to grow somewhat of a business. But yeah, first 3 years of studies were great. I did get the sense that I wanted to be pushed a bit more. I think being lucky enough to have experience in photography, in film before university, it meant that when I got here, I was like, damn, I want to go. I want to go already. I really want to go. And yeah, when I got to third year, which was, when would that have been? 6 months ago, you have this option to take a year in industry. So I said, okay, psych this. I'm going to try and do my studies and spend 6 months as if I had to live off being freelance. What could I earn? What opportunities could I get? And really just put my head down and try and go for things. And that is when, in May that year, just as I'd spent a few months doing that, I got the opportunity to come and work with the Diary CEO team.
Incredible. Before we touch on that, I want to ask, do you need to go to university to learn about cinematography or videography? Or is it just giving you concepts and frameworks to throw over the practical stuff that you can learn by doing?
It's a good question. It's everywhere, isn't it? I definitely had that as well. Do you need to go? I don't think you do, but I would say that what university gives you is experience in a new place, experience with new people, like life experience more than anything. I think I was too quick to dismiss my course because I felt like I would be looking around and I was like, God, we're all going to graduate here and we all have to start working for ourselves. And I was like, how are we going to do that? How is this going to apply to us getting jobs, getting hired and things like that? And I had that kind of like fear and that frustration. But ultimately, when I look back, university is so valuable because it gave me that time to like figure yourself out a little bit, figure out, well, you still are, and also figure out your space and fall in love with a new place, I think. So it is valuable.
I think you're right. I think it allows you to build identity capital, which are the kind of idiosyncratic traits that make you you, and the idiosyncratic experiences that make you you. You get to go on your first night, like university night out.
Yeah.
You get to have your first heartbreak. You get to mingle with different crowds who have different tastes and traits, and you get to learn what you like and what you don't like. And it's called identity capital because you can cash it in for reward. It is equity. It's identity equity. And I understand that if you were to go straight into your production company straight from school after sixth form, for example, you probably still wouldn't really know who you are unless you went to a place like university, or for me, I did an apprenticeship program and I got to learn who I was through that. So I think identity capital for me is one of the best or biggest proponents of a university experience, in my opinion.
100%. I couldn't agree more with that. And I think it's, as long as you feel like you're going to a place where you're not tied down, then at that age, it's a no-brainer. Like I was still able to run my business alongside my studies and mess about and be 18, 19, 20, 21, and that's what it gave me.
So you saw a job opening for Diary of the CEO. What did that job spec look like? What did that job spec look like? And did you know at that moment that you had to apply?
Yeah, I think it was a real crazy moment, but there's actually probably some context before that I'm just thinking like it came at such a weird time in May. And the reason was because I'd spent 3 months before then, as I said, like relentlessly just trying to get some experience. I had that what the fuck moment that you have in third year where you're like, I'm graduating next year. What the hell am I going to do? So I was like lining up opportunities, like thousands of emails to companies being like, hey, I'll make a commercial for you for free. Like, I want to do this documentary. I'd planned to go to Malawi to do a documentary with a charity called Hope for Widows. So I was like lining up as many opportunities as I could. And then I got contacted by Jack Sylvester, who runs the podcast, just as I'd applied for the job position. So I saw the application online from Stephen on his LinkedIn post. You must have seen it. And I was like, fucking hell, this looks crazy. But I saw it and then I saw the comments and then I saw the likes and I was like, okay, I'm one of thousands, there's no chance. So I flung in like a very loose application on a hope and a prayer.
What did the application process look like? What were they asking for?
The application process was like evidence. That's mainly what they want to see of like the biggest things they're asking for in that role is kind of someone who's, it's an intense role. So you want to have evidence that you've been like on the run and you have experience kind of with fast content, with back-to-back content. For me, the only thing I really submitted in my application was a project I'd done beforehand, which was with a guy called Humphrey Boddington, who worked for a company called Conquer. He's a CEO of that company and he did 14 marathons in 7 days. And very similar kind of thing where he contacted me and said, hey, I need a videographer. Do you want to do this for me? Traveled down to London and we spent 7 days traveling around the country as he just ran back to back to back. And I think that for them was like, okay, well, if you can do that, then I'm sure this can probably work out.
So Jack Sylvester reached out to you and what did he say?
It was actually Humphrey, the guy who I was working for, who did the marathon, said, Jack's just asked me about you. I'm going to put you forward. Have you applied? And I said, yeah, I've applied. But Jack contacted me and said, hey, we've got this position. We're looking for someone in London. It's a crazy role. You get to follow Steve around the world. We want to build like a crazy vlog that's going to have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Are you up for it? And I was like, fuck yeah. Like, of course I am. I was a bit hesitant at first because I didn't really know like what was happening. And I was like, yeah, I'm ready. I'm a bit hesitant. And he was like, but we need someone in London. Oh man, I was in Edinburgh. And that's when the doubt started to come in. I was like, I should probably finish my degree. I've got other opportunities. I've got this project in Malawi. Like, what am I going to do? So Jack said, look, well, we've got other applications coming in. I'm having a look through the thousands. So if this doesn't work out with anyone else, I'll get back in touch with you. So I hung up the phone. Fuck. And went straight on the phone to my sister. I said, I've absolutely fucked it. There's no way I'm getting this job. They want someone in London. It's not me. It's not going to work. I kid you not, I spent 3 hours writing a text message to Jack about why I think I'd be ready for this. I've actually got it. I can pull it up if you want.
I'd like to read it or hear it.
I'll see if I can find it. It's so crazy to me that I spent so long writing this message. It just seems like such a long time ago. See if I
It's
can
like
find
6 lines. Please have me. Please have me on.
please. Essentially.
I'll do anything. I'll pay you.
I remember I saved this because I was like, at some time in the future, I'm going to look back on this. Hi, Jack. It was really great to chat on the phone. I'm super excited about this opportunity. So I spent the afternoon, a very long afternoon. I should probably preface that. I spent the afternoon thinking about what we discussed. First off, let me be clear that this is the most important thing. This opportunity is more valuable to me than my degree. So whilst you make your hiring decision, I would like to suggest a way that you can take me on quickly and flexibly. Yada, yada, yada. I was basically trying to pitch myself in the best way. I said, my main goal is to get started with Stephen as soon as possible and make sure my degree doesn't get in the way. That's a process I can sort out later, but let's get this ship sailing, basically. Have a think about it and let me know. And I was like, let's see what he says. And he called me back. I think he sent me a text back saying, like, thanks for sending this. I'll speak to Steve. And it was out. And I was like, okay, I just need to keep getting on with life, like seeing what happens. And at that point, I really didn't believe anything was going to happen. That was, let's call that a Monday, where I sent that text and had that conversation with him. Wednesday, he gives me a call. I was at home in my university flat, and he gives me a call. He says, hey, Will, I had a chat to Steve. We've been looking through your LinkedIn. I really appreciate your message, and we want to offer you the job. And I was like, I played it so cool. I played it so cool.
You're like, I'll think about it.
I played it so cool. I was like, wow, thanks, man. That's great. That's so great. I hung up the phone. I lost my shit. I text my girlfriend. I text my friends. I was like, it's happening. It's happening. And I was really trying to manage my expectations because it just felt so foreign to me. I was like, wow, this is really crazy, but I have no idea what to feel. And in the space of 3 days, I'd gone from this project in Malawi and trying to develop my degree in Edinburgh to moving down. Because I said to him in the text, I was like, I'll move to London next week. So I was now like, okay, this is it. Like, I need to move to London. I need to find a place and start this new job and quit university in 2 weeks. Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about taking action on 8 seconds of courage. Like when you have that feeling like, I'm just going to go for it, I'm just going to try, where you have that ecstatic, euphoric kind of ephemeral feeling when you see an opportunity like that. I think people should just give it a bash, just go for it, because your life can take a complete left turn as a result of such a small decision or such a small action. I mean, your action did end up taking 3 hours to send, but your life has turned upside down for the complete better. You talk about how young you were when you were a videographer filming weddings, and now you left university at 21. Stephen wasn't recruiting for a young person. He could have taken on a 45-year-old, a 40-year-old who has 20 years or 25 years skin in the game, but he chose you. Do you think there's any sort of superpowers that come along with being young that maybe Stephen even recognised?
Oh, great question. How old are you?
25.
Okay, so we can bounce this off then. I think it's a double-edged sword. I've always felt like I'll always start with I'm 21 whenever I used to pitch myself to people for weddings and things like that. Because I think it just helps build some excitement. I've always felt like it's probably good in a personal brand standpoint to say, you know, you're 21 and people are like, what? That's so weird. I mean, thanks to this beard, I look about, 35. But it definitely helps in that aspect of people. It raises a few eyebrows. And I think that's what I want with the kind of work I do and with the way I present myself. I want it to raise a few eyebrows. But at the same time, you can't deny that at 21, you probably don't have loads of experience. So it's a double-edged sword in that sense. So what I think I do have at 21 is probably an ability to work harder than most people, put more hours in, and fail a bit more, because that's the best thing, is that it can go catastrophically wrong. And I'm like, cool, I'm 21. Like, what's next? That's not to say I'm looking for failure. Well, you're not looking for failure, but I think you can be reassured by the fact that if this podcast absolutely crashes at 30, you might have another one.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where the superpower lies, in being so young.
And I totally agree. And there's less risk for those around you because we don't have wives or children or dogs to feed, we don't have mortgages to pay, so we can take these kind of big risks because we have more chances to go again, like you said. And I think what else is important for me is that being young, so I had Dr. Meg J on the podcast. Dr. Meg J wrote a book called The Defining Decade, Your 20s and How to Make the Most of Them. She would be a great guest for Diary of the CEO. She's got 10 million views on TED. Definitely recommend that to Steve. I'll take 10% commission on that one, Steve.
But cool. I'll take 50 cents. Between us, we're in a good spot.
No, she's fantastic, and she speaks about how your 20s are the most difficult decade of your life, and underpins it with psychology. And she talks about how you should just try as many things and basically fail 100%. In your 20s. And I've been thinking about this from a dating point of view. In my 20s, I want to date as many different type of people as possible.
Yeah.
All different nationalities, different values, different purposes, different appearances. Because when I settle down, when I'm 30, for example, with a wife, I will have made a calculated decision based on like so much evidence of what I stand for, what I don't stand for, what I like, what I don't like. But the same goes for experiences. I've started to think about it in that sense. I want to try so much in my 20s that when I become a specialist in my 30s, when I choose the one thing that I want to become pro at, it's not because it was the closest thing to me. It's because I've tried so many different things and I've learned what I'm good at and what I prefer. Right now I'm doing stand-up comedy. I've been doing it for the last year and I'm loving it, absolutely loving it. And it's something I want to keep up, but I've picked up other sports over the last year that I'm awful at.
That's it.
And I think, I think that's useful advice for your 20s.
I think the reason that I'm trying to think like, what would I want to hear from when I'm that age and how do I actually feel about it now? I think is that I personally feel like at least your 20s, and I'm only just started. I'm so young in this, but I kind of feel like you have the expectation that you should have it all figured out, but you're so young, so you have no idea what you're doing. And you want to work super hard, but you should probably also enjoy your 20s and rest. And you should be making loads of money, but then you're super young, so you shouldn't. And it's like this constant, like, which one? But what experiencing loads of different things gives you is the evidence that you are just trying your best and you're trying new things. And I think that's what's super important. And that's one of the reasons I did this role is I was like, there's just going to be so many new things for me to try and to experience and to deal with and to battle that, like, as long as that's the case, it's win-win.
I love that. So when you said yes to the job, when they said yes to you, what was the onboarding process like? How did they best equip you for joining the team?
Fast. That's what it was. It was fast. It was like 2 weeks and I was in, which I think even for them was like, for me especially, was a crazy experience. It came down to London, moved in. They have the amazing onboarding experience in the Diary of a CEO where you come into the office on the first day. I met the team. Everyone's incredible. And then they call it like this initiation. Now that makes it sound terrible. What it really is just like everyone asks you questions and you get to find out a bit about yourself. And I remember that first day I was absolutely bricking it. I was like, God, these questions are going to be like introspective, but it's actually just a nice chance for like you to feel like everyone has an interest in you and people want to know. And I don't know how many other companies would do that, where about half an hour of everyone's day that day is just spent like getting to know you, like hearing about you. People will take you on walks, see how you're doing. And I think for me, that onboarding process was just like the start of a bigger picture that I was seeing, that this Diary of a CEO team isn't just about the Diary of a CEO. It's the culture that they create and the warm experience that you feel when you work there.
I think what's very unique about your role, given that you don't have many years in the game, you've went from being this young 21-year-old student to then having or needing to have such an intimate relationship with the CEO of the company, because you essentially have to follow him around. It's not just like you are his assistant where you can work remotely. You need to spend time with this guy. You need to be essentially his forced best friend almost to a degree. Did he vet you for that? Did he vet you?
Yeah, I guess
from a personality point of view.
I guess we should probably give some context on. So the role in the role of what I'm doing at the minute, we run this vlog called Behind the Diary, which is essentially another channel that Stephen's created, and we want to show people the everyday behind the scenes of Stephen's life. It's posted on YouTube every other week at the minute, and that involves, as you say, following Stephen every day, every meeting, every event, every talk, every brand sponsor, anything. I guess the vetting process must have happened. I guess I wasn't a part of it, but I did have a few conversations with Jack, who's my manager, who manages the podcast. I'd like to know what he spoke to Steve about, but yeah, I remember on the first day we sat down, me, him and Jack, and we started talking about like, okay, like what is a vlog? What do we want this to look like? And they took such a big leap of faith with me. I think that's something I'll need to be eternally grateful for, is because they probably, I'm sure they did know, but in my eyes, I was like, what if I can't do this? Like, how have they just brought someone in this fast and trusted them? And it's credit to them that they have, and that it's kind of working out.
What I find so admirable about your role is that most graduate jobs, for example, if you were to sign up for a graduate role at the age of 22, 23 in a big organization, you're expected to join that firm and not know anything. And you're expected to be malleable, and you're expected to make mistakes and fail and have people over your shoulder correcting your work for at least like 2 years, realistically. But you went into this role and you had to develop this behind the diary series, and I watched the first episode and it was a masterpiece. It was a visual masterpiece to watch. It was really, really great. There's a lot of time, care and attention put into it. But as you see in most projects, as experience or time under tension or time and tenure increases, there's this kind of hockey stick graph whereby also quality and efficiency of processes increases, right? So usually in a workplace, someone's first Excel spreadsheet or first email they send is usually pretty shit. But you didn't have the opportunity to fail for the first time, I don't believe. You had to hit the nail on the head or hit the ground running, as they say. How did you live up to that expectation of quality on your first rep?
Wow. I mean, first that's very kind of you. Thank you. I think you didn't see the failures. That's the thing. You probably didn't see the drafts before then. And you have to think, I joined in May. I think we launched in I can't remember when the first one was, June, July. So that there was time for me really to like get up to speed, start filming with Steve, and then start editing.
You started on iMovie at first?
Yeah, and Steve was like, well, you got to start filming me. It's not a vlog about you. I was like, what? No, yeah, we had time. We had time to figure out what it's going to look like. But also, we didn't know. I personally don't think I knew. So I look back at that first episode and man, I hate it.
Really?
I like it because it's a sign. It's a good sign that we started things. But objectively, for what we're trying to create, it's not, I don't feel like it gives the viewer an insight into behind the scenes. It feels more like a trailer, you know?
Did you spend time storyboarding for that series, or did you spend time designing how it would feel and look and the style of it? Were you part of that process? Yeah,
so it's something I've developed now into my new process. But early on, I think I kind of had no idea what I was doing. And storyboarding was definitely a process in terms of I'd map out the areas of the edit. But when I look at how I created that episode, I'm like, how did this even come together? But storyboarding for me is a real big part of my process now. Yeah, I can go into what that looks like if you like.
Yeah.
So we start with filming. Obviously, you might be spending all day filming with Steve, and I start to index the footage as I go. So for me, it's really important that if I'm filming this conversation with you, I'm starting to think about what I'm going to cut. So if you...
Please do.
Yeah. But I'll start to think about, okay, that's a really interesting point, or that facial expression from someone's reaction is really interesting. So I'll write this into a notes app, super simple, just like investment meeting, who's it with, what's happening, super brief, a couple bullet points that might be interesting. Or I might say, actually, we can cut to here, there. So I'll index the footage. And then when I get into the edit, that's when I'll start the storyboarding process. So I'll review all the footage. I basically watch through it, highlight it green if it's good, highlight orange if I'm not quite sure, and red if it's rubbish, and have all the clips in a timeline, color graded like that. You then bring them all together, and you do that for the days that you think you're going to be including. And that's when you can start the storyboard process. So I can basically look at the week and say, okay, what's the general narrative this week? Okay, if we look at our last episode, it's book launch week. So I'll start to say, what are thumbnails, what are titles that I can create for that process? What are people going to click? Because this is the real learning for me, is that it's learning how to kind of engineer the episode backwards. So we start creating the thumbnails, we start creating the titles. We then test those thumbnails and titles to see what people are interested in. So before I've even started editing, I know based on a Facebook ad test that 5% people click more on a Kylie Minogue title than a book launch week title. So that informs my edit. And then obviously you begin the kind of the editing process.
Who does that analysis of, or that split testing of titles and thumbnails? Do you have a team that do that?
No, so it's passed on to a freelancer, I believe. but I'll just pick the topics that I think might be interesting.
Wow. Okay.
And that's really new for me as well. So I'm still learning that as I go. But that's something for me that I've learned, that in order to be successful, it has to be kind of data driven. Like, I think editing and being a creative is so based on what we feel. Whereas actually, like, a really interesting part of this for me coming into the Diary of a CEO team is that, like, you can test these things. And I can tell you that this title is going to give me 1% more click than that title. Or actually, I probably shouldn't edit an episode based on Steve's podcast with Rich Roll because people click his interaction with Kylie Minogue 3% more. Things like that are just, for me, really fascinating.
How much of that has been Stephen's original thinking, or how much of that has been passed on via Stephen? Because he seems like someone that would think like that in this kind of strategic, kind of niche, esoteric, technical manner. He seems to think differently to everyone else in terms of his approach. Has much of this been passed on over the shoulder through him?
I think the way to look at it is that I'm not the product of Stephen. I'm the product of the Diary of a CEO team and culture that Stephen is really good at promoting. And when you look at what Stephen's fantastic at, in my opinion, of course, only my opinion, is I think he's fantastic at building a team who are absolute evangelists of a certain set of cultures and a certain set of way of doing things. And if I look at my journey in working at the Diary of a CEO since I first started to here, is that the biggest thing that's probably changed is that I can start to embody those maybe 10% better than when I first started. And that's the journey. And the biggest things we kind of preach in what we do are experimentation, and staying ahead, and in 1%. And these are the cultures that kind of Steve really, really pushes. So that's why we start to become data driven, because you're looking at, okay, how can I improve that 1% better? Excuse me.
What does the full Diary of the CEO team outfit look like? Who's all involved?
So it's quite a small team. There's about 30 of us.
Still quite a lot for a podcast if you think about it.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm so young that I don't really have perspective in what I probably do, but I don't know what a big podcast company is or a small company is. But what I do know is that those are 30 people who absolutely love what they do, and they're absolute evangelists of the culture that we promote, the podcast, the impact it's having, and everything like that.
Are there any roles that I would be surprised by that I wouldn't believe would exist for a podcast?
Oh, 100%. The data scientist.
That's incredible.
Yeah, data scientist for a podcast, a head of experimentation. And I think if the really interesting here is that if you look, what are the philosophies that we try and work towards? Okay, well, we try and promote experimentation. We try and focus on marginal gains wherever we can. So if we take experimentation, that's the top line. Okay, like that's writing on the wall and saying we experiment. Okay, well, how do you get there? Okay, so we need to have someone who manages those experiments. Okay, that's the head of experimentation. And then you need to have a philosophy that people can embody every single day. So that's having a Slack channel called Experiments, where people can put in their experiments, what they're measuring and how it's working. And that's having basically a reward system underneath that. There's probably a better way to structure that. A reward system underneath that if people don't send in experiments X amount every single month into the Slack channel, then they don't get rewards. So it's really like creating a system where people are encouraged and motivated to experiment and not criticize if it doesn't work. Because ultimately the result of the experiment doesn't matter. It's more just the fact that you've tried to get there. So experimentation is a big part of the culture there, yeah. I also mentioned data science. That probably links to the 1% gains that we're always trying to look for. And we're just like obsessed with the fact that 1% gains are the way to conquer the world. I really look at this for the vlog as well. It's like every single week, how can I make it 1% better? You look at Sir David Brailsford, who took the GB cycling team to the pinnacle of cycling. He was just obsessed with marginal gains. How can I make the bottle 1% thinner? How can I make the handlebars 1% lighter? And what this does is it doesn't just improve things over a period of time, but it gives you the sense that you're making progress. So in this Diary of a CEO team, everyone is so focused on the 1% that when you look around you, everyone's improving, even if it's 1%. So you just feel like there's this fire underneath you that like we're going somewhere.
It's funny how that relates back to your experience with your high school teacher.
Yeah,
who
interesting.
gave you 1% marginal gain feedback week on week.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, exactly that. And what it really gave me is a sense of progress. That like you're going somewhere and you don't really need to know where that is. But if you have the feeling that you're going somewhere, you almost feel a bit invincible.
Yeah, and that your work matters as well.
Yeah, perhaps that as well, yeah.
I want to ask about the Diary of the CEO podcast studio, because over the last couple of years, I know it's changed locations, but the the feeling, the look of it has changed the same. What does that setup look like? Is it actually Stephen's house, or is it a makeshift studio that's made to look like Stephen's house?
I'm probably not the best person to comment on it. Jack Sylvester, who runs the podcast, he's founded it from the ground. He started the podcast with Stephen. But we have a studio in Shoreditch, and that's where most guests travel to. We also have studios out in LA and New York that we travel the podcast to. But yeah, Jack's, him and Stephen have basically pulled that out the furnace and molded it into what it is today, which is just an incredible space. A space as well that embodies those exact philosophies that we were talking about, and all the things that people probably won't see about, like, it's not just a podcast studio. It's a podcast studio that as soon as a guest walks in, their music is playing, because the research team have found out what music that person is interested in. It has a certain smell. It has a certain feeling when you walk into it. So every single minute detail is what leads into those big conversations. And that's, I think, what people might not see. But as I say, I can only speak on behalf of the vlog.
Well, Paul actually played Abba when I walked in today. He played Mamma Mia. And I don't know what that smell was, Paul. It's indescribable.
Yeah, we need to work on that one a little bit.
Beef Monster Munch or something, mate. I don't know.
Prawn cocktail. It says more about you. If he's researched it, then yeah.
Oh, he has. He's been up and close to that smell. Oh, wow. Oh, that's fantastic. So with your work with Stephen over the last couple of months, you've been following him through some of the most fascinating places alongside some of the most fascinating people. Given your journey started of dropping out of university and now you're following one of the most prolific and prominent entrepreneurs in the country, who have you met in your journey with him that has truly given you a pinch me moment?
As in the person that's had as in terms of an impact, or just in terms of
being starstruck? Yeah.
It's every day, to be honest. Like I genuinely do think I have the coolest job in the world.
I think you do too.
And I keep reminding myself that, not because I don't believe it, but because you have to, because things can become, at the pace things move, it can become so normal. Some of the pinch me moments probably involve like Dragon's Den, being on set with Dragon's Den, meeting the dragons and seeing how that operates, seeing like how hard they work. I don't think people know is that like they're on set all day for months, just going pitches through pitches through
hundreds of pitches, right?
Hundreds of pitches that last anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. So my mind was blown just with like admiration for like, wow, like this is huge, the work they're putting in. We had the crazy opportunity to meet Prince William. That experience was nuts. Just like, how is this happening? And I think I realize in hindsight how crazy it is, because when I'm there, I'm like, okay, I've got like a job to do. Like I'm like laser focused on like, okay, like what's the story here? How can we tell it? But to think that we flew in from Boston, Stephen was giving a talk in Boston. We flew overnight back to the UK. We landed at 6 a.m. We then traveled through Heathrow to a Premier Inn to shower and get ready. Stephen got ready. We then drove to Bournemouth and were with Prince William for midday and spent the whole day with him. And I was like shooting the whole day, and then we got in the car at the end of the day and I was like, what? Like, how has this just happened?
Boston to Bournemouth, that's the least sexy Miami to Ibiza I've ever heard.
Yeah, Bournemouth was crazy, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's definitely so many moments like that where it's pinched me, but also just like the small moments you're in meetings and your mind's being blown because you're listening to investment meetings or just like culture meetings with teams, and you're soaking all of this in and your mind's being blown, and then you're like, shit, I've got a camera in my hands. I need to film this, you know? So yeah, man, that's not a very concise answer, but it's more because there's just so many things like that.
I understand that a lot. Like, not to your level over the last couple of years with my job, and I guess this podcast as well, is taking me to some crazy heights and
absolutely
crazy opportunities, meeting literally my idols or flying down to London on a weekly basis. And I need to, instead of comparing sidewards or upwards to someone like Stephen, or comparing to some of the other podcasters or people in my spheres in Glasgow or the UK, I need to think back to like previous versions of David, like 18-year-old David. Like, I'm living his dream. Yeah, I'm not a multi-millionaire. I'm not a celebrity or anything like that, but I am living the dream of an 18-year-old David, and it sounds like you're living the dream of any 21-year-old, never mind 18-year-old Will.
Yeah, God, yeah. I don't think it feels real, to be honest. But I think you just have to keep reminding. Like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you keep reminding yourself? I'd love to know.
Perspective or personification. I will go to some of these places in the persona of 18-year-old David. So I'll look at the skyscrapers that I've seen not a million times, but hundreds of times, and try and think, how would David see this? Every time I step on a plane for work, I think I am so grateful to be stepping on a plane, full stop, never mind for work. When I grew up, we never went abroad for holidays. I never left Scotland. The fact that I'm traveling on a British Airways flight to London on a weekly basis is insane, absolutely insane. But only when I see it through that kind of rose-tinted glasses. I do a lot of journaling as well, gratitude journaling. I think that's really important for positive reinforcement. And sharing those experiences with those around me that are close to me. So earlier in the year, I got to go to the Burberry Awards. I was up for Inspirational Role Model of the Year, and there was like Amazing. Stormzy was there. I know you've got to meet him through your work. Loads of celebrities I got to party with, and it was in Mayfair. And I remember FaceTiming my dad from the balcony. And my dad is in a council estate in the arse end of Ayrshire, on the west coast of Scotland. He had a pint of Tennent's in his hand and a cigarette in the other. And I was FaceTiming him with all these celebrities on a red carpet. And I just thought to myself, like, no one else is doing that right now. That's just me. And just bringing him along for the journey and almost like comparing, contrasting where I was and where I am, it keeps me kind of motivated and in perspective of that environment. Do you have any tips for that?
That all resonates with me. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that it's like the pinch me moments that I mentioned before. It's like they shouldn't be the moments where you're like, wow, this is crazy. And I think the biggest thing for me is that when I speak to people and they're like, you've met like this person on the podcast, and you've seen this person, you saw Prince William, you saw Stormzy, like that's crazy, like that must be so nuts. I think actually for me it's like the real way to kind of find perspective is actually just in the smallest moments of like, if you can even take those and be like, wow, like I'm sat here behind the camera filming someone who's giving an incredible talk to 2,000 people, or I'm surrounded by a team of people who are exceptional workers and they support me. If you can appreciate that, then actually like the other stuff doesn't matter. Yes. So like the Prince William thing, I'm like, yeah, that is incredible. But like it's the thing that really matters for me is the other thing.
Well, that was a question I really wanted to ask you, Will, was you're getting the opportunity to meet all of these celebrities because the person that you work with has done incredible work that merits him to be in those rooms. It would be easy for you, I'm not saying that you do this, but I'm saying it would be easy for you to internalize a kind of narrative of, I wish I did the things that would merit me to have these conversations. Like, you want to be Stephen, you could be envious of Stephen being in these opportunities, but in fact you're the person that's documenting this person doing that. Have you ever struggled with that battle of wanting to be Stephen or in his shoes, or have you always felt very comfortable being Will, the excellent, amazing 21-year-old camera guy who's fortunate enough to film someone like Stephen? Interesting,
that's such a great question. So the question there really is like, if doing what I'm doing, you almost end up wanting to become that person?
Essentially.
Is that the question?
Or feeling like you haven't done the work that deserves to be... you haven't done the work that merits you to be in the rooms with these people. Because Stephen has quote unquote done the work. I know it's a whole team effort that got him there.
Yeah. I think there's a side early on, I definitely felt that like... I wouldn't call it, I don't think I'd call it imposter syndrome, but it was more when you're in a room with these, let's not even put it in a room of like celebrities, when you're in a team of A performers, A players, you have that feeling of like, what at first I thought was imposter syndrome, it's actually just desire to meet that level. It's like, I'm not feeling like insignificant, I'm just feeling impatient. I'm like, I really want to get there. And it's the same in rooms. I know that I haven't done the work that Stephen's done, and everything he's done is incredible, and it's very separate. But that doesn't make me any less worthy of being in the room, because I've still got a job to do. And that's actually the thing for me, is that I shouldn't be seen in that room. Like you develop an interesting relationship when you're filming, public figures in sometimes private spaces and conversations that you have to blend into the background, I think. And that's one thing I really try and do, is that like, it shouldn't feel like you're there. So a lot of the times I'm not even thinking about being in the room, because I'm just focused on like, what's the conversation here? What's the story?
What's it like to hang around with Stephen? You must get a lot of flights and cars and boats and everything else with him. What's he like to hang around with? Does he lift your aspirations? Is he a good friend?
100%. He's an incredible, it's so weird that he's my boss, but he's an incredible person to work for. And everyone in the team will echo that, I'm sure. I'm sure I can say this, that there's the Diary CEO have never had someone leave the company. So you might have people who perhaps have had to leave or have been fired, but you've never had someone leave the company, which I think is just testament to what trickles down from the top, what trickles down from Stephen and the culture he creates, from Michael, the managing director, Ahmed, the CFO, Danny, the commercial manager, like all these A players in the team, creating that sense that means that people like me and everyone else, the other 24 people, just show up to work with that kind of sense of like, fuck, we're going somewhere, we're driven, we're motivated. And I feel that with Stephen. He's an incredible boss. He supports you. You can be having, I sometimes think of it as like, you can be in your own head and you can be like really, really struggling. And that's when a text just seems to magically appear, being like, hey, this is great, keep going, And at the same time, he's someone who wants to push you and make sure that like you can surpass your own ambition, So like we've released the vlog and we're like, yeah, we're doing bi-weekly. He's like, you can do weekly. Whether you believe it or not in that moment, you're like, okay, let's go. Let's try and figure that out. So he's incredible at supporting you, but also pushing you. Yeah, I personally feel that.
So on that point, if you were sitting here right now, given that you've worked so intimately for the last few months, what do you think he would say about you and your work?
Oh man, that's a tough question. He's happy with it. I think he's really happy with it. But we both know it's like just the start. Do you know what I mean? Like we look back, I don't want to speak on his behalf. I look back at the first couple episodes and I'm like, oh, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And I really don't want to get too complacent with it and be like, because I just think this can be so much bigger. This can really be an opportunity to give people like the feeling that they understand what it takes to perform at that level and be in Stephen's life. But what would he say? Oh, I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Well, it's fine, don't. Well, because I have the real answer to that.
Do you?
He sent me a voice note at 5 a.m. this morning.
You're joking.
Letting me know exactly what he thinks about you.
Hello, David. Stephen here. Thought I'd send you a voice note just to let you know what I think of Will. So Will has all the core components of someone that can basically do anything in their life. And I'll list what those core components are. And these are rare core components. I don't know many other people. I'd say somewhere between 5% of people that I work with have all of these core components. First of all, he's incredibly hardworking. He doesn't shy away from doing the hard things, whether you train with him in the gym or you work with him in the office or you travel around the world with him. Hard work is no enemy of his. He leans into it. And I think he understands the role that hard work plays in achieving all of your greatest goals in life. So hard work, number one. Number two is self-driven curiosity. He is obsessively curious, and that means that he'll acquire knowledge faster than most people over the next decade. High attention to detail, again, absolutely key success trait that I think some of the greatest people I work with have. He cares so much about the smallest things, and that over any prolonged period of time is the difference between exceptional work and good work. Number four, I'd say attitude, which is you join my team and we run with the wolves. We run very quickly, we run very intensely, and we do very, very big things. And it's difficult, especially when you first join, because there's a bigger sort of adjustment period. That's when you can see someone's attitude, and he has a 10 out of 10 attitude. He's the nicest guy. And so it's hard to think of a reason other than lightning striking him or something that Will won't become just world-class in whatever he puts his mind to. And I mean truly world-class. I mean, not like really good, as in, really good. I mean like world-class. I mean number one in whatever space he applies himself to. And I think that's what's happening now with what he's doing with me in the vlog. I see that we're both still in Gear 1, and I know what Gear 4 looks like, and Gear 4 would put him in the world-class category, and that's the trajectory he's on. A truly unique individual, works harder than everybody, cares more about the detail, nice guy, great attitude, absolutely insatiable learner. Yeah, that's my TLDR on Will. Hope the conversation went well. See you guys soon.
Damn, these AI robots are getting good, eh?
Oh, your impressions are amazing, by the way.
Damn, that is. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, mate.
That's absolutely nuts.
I think that's a wrap for the podcast, mate.
Poof, fucking hell.
If people want to get in touch with the journey that you're on as a spectator, where can they find you online, mate?
Well, first thing they should do is subscribe to Behind the Diary on YouTube, and make sure that every week at 6 p.m. they tune in to subscribe, comment, and like. But my Instagram's BTS with Will, BTS with Will, spelled as it sounds. And yeah, drop me any questions, anything like that. David, thank you for doing this. This has been such a privilege, and I hope there's just been some value for someone in the audience or yourself. I know I've definitely taken a lot from it.
Thanks, Will, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, brother.